Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the National Indigenous Agriculture and Food Sharing Circles hosted by the Canadian Agriculture Human Resources Council. My name is Beverly O'Neill and my traditional name is Clowan Pethke. I'm coming from the unceded traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and specifically in the downtown of Vancouver, British Columbia. I am a Tanaha, in case anybody doesn't know that. So I'm from the Tanaha Nation. We're located in the southeast corner of British Columbia. So thank you for joining us for our fourth National Indigenous Agriculture and Food Sharing Circle. This is our fourth of our 5-speaker series. So thank you to anyone who's joined us to all four, and for those of you who are joining us today for your first or second or third time to these sessions. So today we are going to go until quarter after the hour, and the reason you want to stay till the end is we have a prize draw for our Indigenous attendees. So you must be present to win, and we'll be drawing for 3 $100 draws. So I'd like to also introduce you to our panelists. They're actually off video right now, but today's speakers are going to be, we've got Dale Warm, he's with the National Indigenous Agriculture Association, and Dale, we met decades ago when Dale worked for Agriculture, Agri-Foods Canada, Saskatchewan, a wealth of knowledge. He's got great knowledge on agriculture as well as the national network, because he's traveled across Canada supporting First Nations and agriculture. And he himself, all of our speakers are Indigenous people. We've got Stephanie Cook from Opaskwayak Cree First Nation. Love what they're doing there with the vertical aquaponics garden and the greenhouse and their garden. So she's going to share more information on that, how they got started, how they've been able to navigate this crazy field we're in this world we're living in. And there's my first pun of the session, field. And then we've got Jacob Beaton from Tea Creek Farm. Jacob, he and his wife and his family decided the city was enough and bought a farm up in his home area in Kitwanga. It's a northern inlet in British Columbia at the coast, and they do community gardens, greenhousing, and what's youth and community training programs, because we're going to hear more about that, the First Nations program he's doing with all the different aspects of it. And he also does biofuels, so be sure to ask any questions on that as well. When I was writing up the questions for our panelists, I noticed that even though today's topic is greenhousing, that we could also be talking about youth, and our panelists are also going to be talking about some of their youth initiatives in there. So a couple things here. This is a webinar, so for people in the viewing audience, you will only be able to see the speakers and the panel itself, not the others. But I do invite you in the meantime to let us know who's online. Put in the chat feature your name, where you're from. Feel free to say hello to others, make connections there. We do want in these sessions for people to build their network and not only learn the great things that are going on across Canada in our First Nations and Indigenous communities in agriculture and agri-foods, but we also want you to build your network and leave these sessions with more information than you started. Speaking about information, our wonderful technology person, Aaron Bryson from Canadian Agriculture Human Resources Canada, he will be collecting any web addresses or report names along this conversation. So don't feel you have to rapidly write down an email address or a web address, because Aaron is going to send those out to everyone who's registered for the session after. And to our speakers, if you haven't yet let Aaron know if he can share your information, just send him a quick thumbs up, or actually a little email or a chat message, and he'll make sure he sends it out too. At the end of our 5 session, Aaron is also going to be sending you a full list of all of the resources and contacts identified throughout the 5 sessions itself. During the session, if you want to ask a question to the speakers, feel free to add it in either the Q&A feature in the Zoom app here, or add it on chat, and I'll be monitoring both of those and adding it in. So this is a fairly informal conversation once we get started, but getting started also requires we have our hosts of this event do an opening presentation, and we also get your feedback so we know how we're doing on this. At the end of the session, Erin will be sending you a link asking you to do a post-session survey, providing us with ideas and feedback on how we can make these sessions better and information you would like for possible future sessions. The other thing is this session is being recorded. It's being recorded so that we can share on the CAHRC website in a few months the edits from the session, so some key sound bites. If you've missed some key bits, we'll have them posted on the Canadian Agricultural Human Resources Council website probably in January. So I'm going to invite Deborah Hauer from Canadian Agriculture Human Resources Council to do some opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Beverly, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our sharing circle. On behalf of the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council, I would like to welcome everybody to today's sharing circle. We are very, very pleased to co-host the Sharing Circle series and to support the development of an Indigenous agriculture network made up of farmers, agriculture producers from across the country, and those individuals, those people who are interested in learning more. So this series is meant to provide an opportunity for people to share their stories and also learn from each other. And we are very much looking forward to hearing from you about what a network might look like and the types of activities that that could happen in the future. So thank you very much, Beverly.
Great, thanks, Deborah. And I think we also have you or Jade speaking on the National Occupational Standards.
I'll ask Jade to jump in at this point. And Jade.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just a quick comment around this. We would love to have some input on the National Occupational Standards that were developed that reflect the practices in agriculture, but do not have the Indigenous lens. And we're hoping to have that included to really capture the practices that may be relevant to the categories that are on screen. So the livestock, apiary controlled environments, which includes the greenhouse, vegetable production, crop production, and field vegetables. So we have these packages together, and certainly value your time and realize that this is a larger endeavor to review and provide some feedback. So there is a stipend. So if you have some interest, please let me know in the chat, and we will follow up by email. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jade. And anyone who's interested or can share a lens on these National Occupational Standards, if you could let us know by Friday. It's just reviewing them and letting CAHRC know if they've missed anything. So great, thanks, Bear. Perfect. So Jade and Erin, if you guys can collect these email addresses, that would be great. And we've got a request to see if Erin, maybe you can answer this question. If anyone's missed a webinar, can they see the full webinar on CAHRC? So I would suggest the answer should be yes. So I see Deborah nodding. So yes to let's see, it was Nicole who asked that question. So yes, Nicole, we'll make sure that we get them on the CAHRC website. I also want to do a couple little shout outs here to some people who are joining us from across Canada. So like I said, feel free to add your hello onto the chat line here. And for our viewing audience to just feel free to take a view of them. So welcome to Bear from Tobico First Nation. We've got Paul Pascoe from Natural Resources Canada, Dustin Hoff, egg coordinator with Manitoba Métis Federation, Tammy Poulis with Woodstock First Nation. I'm just going to scroll through a couple of them fast. We've got people from Kainai Nation, from Mississauga First Nation, Statmik Nation, Coldwater Indian Band, Gitxsan Territory, Micmac. Really great to see everybody here from across Canada. But Saskatoon Tribal Council, Alderville. Terrific. So in the interest of getting you to where we want to be today, I'm going to start our speaker series here. Our first speaker is actually, CAHRC, did you want to mention the wage subsidy program?
We'll just mention the wage subsidy program just very, very briefly. So if you are an employer and are interested in hiring a student, CAHRC has just a new program offering a wage subsidy to employers if a student is hired through as a requirement for an internship or a co-op program through a course requirement. So please, again, if you're interested in learning more, Erin, if you'd be so kind as to put the link, the AgriTalent link in the chat box for anybody who's interested, and we'd be very pleased to chat with you about that. So again, it would be hiring a student that would go between now and the end of March of next year for if the student is in a post-secondary program and the program requires an internship or co-op program. So we'd be happy to chat anytime. You have something to say, Jade?
Just one thing, and if there is anyone that has hired a student during this term from September to now, if they have hired someone, they are eligible for that funding. We will be able to give that retroactively. So there's an opportunity. We're going into December, but we can certainly provide that funding for September, October, and November. So just something to keep in mind.
Thank you. Thank you, Beverly.
Great, thanks, Deborah and Jade. So you would think that with this agriculture, it can be things like even on the business planning side or the website marketing side for an agriculture business. So feel free to reach out to Canadian Agriculture Human Resources Canada. So this is where we bring in our speakers. We've got Dale Warm. So I'm going to ask Dale, Stephanie, and Jacob if you can take yourself off video. And Dale, we'll start with you. Dale, as I mentioned, I met him a number of years ago, decades ago, actually. He's out of Saskatchewan and is involved in an initiative on the National Indigenous Agricultural Association. So Dale, if we can put you back on video. Great, thanks. There we go.
Okay,
so introduce you to Dale. So Dale, like I said, many decades ago, you and I met. And during that period, you were with Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada until you retired. And that was, I think it's not necessarily retired. You've just really started a new phase of your life. And you and your colleague, Darren Cook, who was also with Ag Canada, both sort of retired at the same time and worked on starting a national initiative on Indigenous agriculture. So, during your time and what are your work here with the National Indigenous Agriculture Initiative, you guys explored needs and opportunities of First Nations on it. So tell us more about the national initiative and, what are you seeing across Canada and what are our needs and how can we work together on making, on growing, there's my second pun, growing Indigenous agriculture. Dale.
Thank you, Beverly, and I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for the invite, and welcome to everyone that's joined this. And I'm very pleased to speak to all of you. And I hope and if you do ask questions, I hope that I can answer your questions properly. Anyways, I used to work for Ag Canada, and with the work that I did, I traveled across Canada to various First Nations and Métis communities. And we always tried to get in touch with the local producers and to ask them what they needed or what did they see, where did they see a gap? And often the biggest gap was communications. They never knew what Agriculture Canada was doing. They never knew what the Provincial Ministry of Agriculture was doing. I don't know how it happened, but the message just didn't get out. And we seen ourselves as sort of this in between producers, Indigenous producers, and the provincial and federal departments of agriculture. And we tried to bring them together, and that's our main goal. And it has worked in a limited way. But overall, we need a lot more people across Canada to be working at this, to join in on this. Because as you know, government is always asking for more statistics. They want to see more and more. And you bend over backwards to give them more, and somehow nothing really happens. But the only thing is I could say is just keep on trying, because that's the only way that stuff will happen.
So, so Dale, you were saying, what's needed is connecting Indigenous and First Nations with like Ag Canada and other funders itself. So you're seeing that as a role of a national organization?
That is one of the roles with connecting with government. The other one is connecting with academia, where a lot of the research goes on. And the other one is connecting with other First Nations or Métis groups across Canada. So we have this huge group of people that can work together. And so, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Dale, you mentioned to me another time that one of the initiatives you're working on is STEM. So that's the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So if any of you have heard it, it seems to be the buzzword with a lot of the youth initiatives, because getting them excited about that. So I understand you're working on one in agriculture. Can you tell us more about that and sort of what regions you're doing it in?
Okay. I used to do this across Canada, but now I've been focused lately on Saskatchewan, where I live. And so I'm starting science clubs on reserve. And so that's the logistics are still being worked through that. With the pandemic, some communities don't allow visitors, and so we have to work around that. But we think that starting these science clubs on reserve is the best way to get kids interested in STEM, and then maybe maintain that interest throughout their school years from K to 12. And I think that's where you really have to get kids interested in STEM, because by the time they're in grade 12, they usually have an idea of what they're going to do, and it's kind of hard to change them around.
So how does this, are any of these STEM initiatives for youth connected with greenhousing?
They will be. We're working with agriculture in a classroom. And so they've got these initiatives and work plans that teachers can use, or activities to teach agriculture in the classroom. And so that's one important thing. And greenhousing can be one of them. They're starting off with gardens, just gardens out in the open. But greenhousing can become one of them. It's a little more cost upfront. So maybe the school can cover that. We can also find other organizations such as Ag Canada or the province that can cover it, or even private industry. And private industry is another group that we are approaching for our initiatives in STEM.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Dale. Hey, I'm going to ask our other two speakers if they can join us right now. If you can take yourself put yourself on video. And so why don't we get you involved in this conversation, because it's right up the alley. They said when I was writing up these questions, I couldn't help but go, this is also youth session. And I think that's what a number of our viewers are interested in too, is finding out how do we get youth involved in here. But why don't I start with a question for Stephanie? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, can we see? Yeah, can we catch you on video so we can see you as well?
Yeah, for some reason it's telling me your host, you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, here, let's
Yeah.
try that again. Did that
Okay.
work? There we go.
There we are.
Excellent. Sorry. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Stephanie. Glad to see you. Glad you're joining us. So I'm going to ask a question here, Stephanie, and then I'll go to Jacob, and let's have a dialogue on what's going on here in how we can get our youth involved. And like I said, this conversation is also focusing on greenhouse, because this program that even Deborah had mentioned on the student funding, September to March. That's not usually a greenhouse, a growing season, is it, in agriculture? Like what Dale, you just said that you guys had -30 already in Saskatchewan?
Oh no, not this. Past years we've had -30 at this time of the year.
Yeah, so we do have some situation here with the weather, but greenhousing it seems to be something that we can be doing more of after. But hey, Stephanie, your community has 6,400 members, about 6,400 members, and over 15,000 hectares in 21 reserves. Why'd you go to a greenhouse when people would say, "Hey, you got lots of land. Why don't you just do crops?" What happened that inspired your community to do a greenhouse, and a vertical greenhouse at that?
Oh, there are many factors for that came into play with that one. One of them, well, where should I begin? That's why I'm like, but yeah, one of the reasons we started was, well, it all started with diabetic research first, wanting to know, cause and effect of having produce in your community that is readily available to community members, and what those long-term outcomes can be. Among that, there are many other factors that come into play, as well, as we've seen over the past few weeks and months, from global climate to forest fires happening in the south of us. We were cut off from our major trucking route was cut off. Trucks had to go around to get produce to us. I'm pretty sure this is not only us that this is happening to. This is probably happening everywhere in the country right now. And to some aspect, things are going on. Yeah, but it basically comes down to food security for our community. Well, and then there was other aspects behind it too. Education resources. We've used Smart Farm for many different aspects within our community, from the health center to education, and then also restorative justice. So again, looking at many different avenues of how to use the vertical smart farm, I guess, year round, because we can operate 365 days a year. We can grow up to 75 different produce. We've challenged ourselves in that area working along with our partners. And pretty much just basically had to learn ourselves, like what is agriculture, because OCN does have parcels of land which are deemed agricultural lands, but they're not being utilized at the moment because currently people don't understand. But again, like, our community has taken that initiative. We started getting into vertical farming again. We have there's many, like I said, many pluses to it, and then also the energy consumption, being able to make nutrient dense vegetables that are, say, tailored to be fed to people who suffer from type 1, type 2 diabetes, or yeah, so many aspects of it. It's just I could
So many things you guys are doing there, because I remember in one of our conversations you said that when the romaine lettuce was contaminated,
yeah.
you guys had what, 3,000, 4,000 head of romaine lettuce?
Yeah, that was winter of 2018. There was a national recall for romaine lettuce. Everybody was hit across the country for some reason.
Except you guys.
Yeah, and we had an abundance. And it's just been one thing right after another where we've had, run into obstacles, and then we're like, okay, well, let's work our way through this. How can we come to a head and figure out how to get around?
Is that how can we come to a head of lettuce?
Yeah, how can we come to a head of lettuce? That's what we say, romaine calm.
Sorry. I think it's going to be crazy joke day today. But you'd mentioned that because you guys have a closed system, and you're very tight in how you process that, your lettuce was clear of contamination and sold out overnight.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting, because it was just basically people coming in and saying, we need lettuce for this, we need lettuce for that. Well, okay, unfortunately, it's just supposed to be for community sources, but we have the capability to sell. So that opened up, more avenues of bringing in producers that are interested in the product. And now we're looking at actually turning our smart farm into a place to produce what I'm calling it is designer vegetables who are tailored to people who need them. For us particularly, it's people with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, so you mentioned it was your greenhouse in your community was started to address a health need, and
Yeah.
specifically that of diabetes.
Well,
Hey,
yeah, and to expose, students, because initially what had happened was this smart farm was supposed to be in the high school. What happened
mm,
was the equipment couldn't be supported by the equipment was too heavy for the floor in the high
oh,
school. So literally overnight, what the Korean cast did was they drafted up um, new blueprints and virtually built this thing in our community hall. So we are now located in our community hall, which is right next door to the Beaches Wilson Health Center, and
yeah.
right across the road from the high school. So we're kind of centrally located, so it's easy for people to find us.
Question is it some the vertical greenhouse? Is it something that can be started off small and communities can add to it?
hmm I see it as one option. Like, there are many options as
Yeah,
I'm learning,
yeah.
getting into the agricultural field now and coming to an understanding about food and food security, food sovereignty, how it
Yeah.
works. It's interesting to see.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Like I rave about what you guys are doing there because it's just in your case you guys it was driven first by community health concerns by making
Mhm.
by desire to help your people be healthy, whereas at other times it might be driven by an economic reason. So really great. So this always is a great segue to what Jacob's doing, and you guys stay online because we're gonna have more of a dialogue here, and feel free to add to anything. But Jacob, Kitwanga, that's a small village in the inlet in rural BC. I reminded myself of where that is on the map yesterday, and you
Yeah,
like go up the coast, up the coast, up the coast, and then take a right up a river and go up the inlet for a while, and then we get there. So it's I understand it's a fairly small community where most of the people are First Nations people. They're
yeah,
your people, and you
yeah,
moved home from the big city. So,
yeah,
I know you just completed your first year of training and you guys have partnered with a number of different organizations.
that's right.
And you're doing a ton of things. So I don't want to, I don't want to tell your story. I want you to tell it, let everybody know here. What are you guys like this is amazing. You said what, a
Yeah,
thousand people come through your farm this summer. Tell us
1,000
more.
Indigenous people. We're not counting all the non-Indigenous people as well. So yeah, 1,000 Indigenous visitors, and on top of that, we trained 70 people, Indigenous people who are dedicated to training. Yeah, so our story in a nutshell is we moved here purely for personal reasons. I was doing Indigenous business consulting, working for First Nations in different locations. But I became very curious about food production, and been mentored by some people in different places on Turtle Island, North America. So I've got a friend who's runs a phenomenal organic farm down in Oregon. It's commercially successful, and another friend who is growing on the side slopes of Newfoundland, where the trees are growing sideways from the wind coming off the Atlantic. And I thought, gosh, if he can do it, I can do it, right? And if he can be commercially successful, I can do it here, where we've got a pretty welcoming climate for farming here. So one of the first questions I asked is it, why aren't we doing this? Like, why aren't we growing an abundance of affordable, healthy local food as First Nations people? And I started researching and touring and going to visit these different locations. And I realized it's because we don't, like, the knowledge has been, in our case, stripped away. And we haven't kept up with the world when it comes to agricultural innovation. So, I mean, as we know, Indigenous people in the Americas were agrarian, we're farmers for 8,000 to 10,000 years, very, very long time, and developed some of the world's most valuable food and cash crops today. I won't go through the list, but we know what they are. And up here, it was no different, believe it or not. Indigenous people here, just in our valley, I looked it up and talked to two of the First Nations here. We had 600 acres of farmland around the time of kind of colonization. There were only 2-3 settler homes here in this valley, and there were a couple thousand Indigenous people, and there were 600 acres of what we now call farmland. So, and that's down to zero, right?
Mhm.
Through dispossession and colonial policies, which remove people from their land. So one of my so what happened is the pandemic hit, and we got approached by multiple First Nations, my wife and I, hey, you guys know how to grow food, can you come grow food for us? And we were like, no, we can't. We can barely keep on top of our own farm. Anyone who farms knows how much work it is, especially when you're starting up, because we were, first year was 2019, and then 2020, we went kind of full on, and then now 2021, so this would be like a third year. And so we came up with what we call the Tea Creek model in 2020, which the whole idea is it's all land-based, culturally safe, Indigenous-led and staffed learning, and where we want to rebuild our whole Indigenous economy. Like, we need our trades back, we need our tradespeople back, we need our manufacturing industries, Indigenous manufacturing back, we need our managers, people who know how to run businesses, run staff. We need everything. We need people who cook and know how to cook with local food. So we need all of that back. So that's kind of the Tea Creek model in a nutshell. We pitched our hearts out last year. We did start getting some funding this year, and we ran training programs. So like you said, we had over 1,000 guests come to the farm. That included school children, preschool children, staff from various First Nations, community members coming for free vegetables. So we grew 20,000 pounds of vegetables on under 2 acres using a variety of methods, but all high intensity organic style methods. Yeah, we also got greenhouse manufacturing up and running using our own local Indigenous youth. We trained them in carpentry, and we manufactured greenhouses out of locally milled wood that were cheaper than anything we could find being imported. So yeah, so that's the Tea Creek story in a nutshell. Yeah, I see you got the website. There's lots of information on our website. You got to dig around for some of it. Go into the Instagram and just scroll through the photos from this year. It's pretty cool. We got tons and tons of photos on our Instagram feed.
Yeah, there's your greenhouse part there. And you also have, look, you've got your training, and I love that you use sovereignty training, because you know, we talk often in these conversations about food security, but you've expanded food to food sovereignty. So quick question, what is food sovereignty, Jacob?
Yeah, so the commonality between food security and food sovereignty is it's about feeding people. Where they diverge is that food sovereignty, and we've adopted the UN Declaration on Food Sovereignty, which came out of Africa, which has struggled a lot with colonial impacts of colonization and colonial impacts to food systems, very similar to what we've suffered as Indigenous people. So food sovereignty is about knowledge transfer, so teaching people about food production. It's about valuing food producers, so instead of chasing the bottom dollar, it's about valuing your farmers and people who produce food, your ranchers, and everybody in that food chain. It's about working with nature instead of against nature. So stop trying to spend billions of dollars trying to grow tomatoes in the Arctic. You know, maybe we should look at growing things that can naturally grow. So that really impacts us and the kind of food we grow here. And it also is about reducing dependencies on like that fragile global supply chain. So we look at, and that's where some of the biofuels things come in. Like we think about, hey, what happens if our gas stations run dry like they did in BC? They've run dry right now. And we thought about that ahead of time, and we were like, well, we can make our own biodiesel, right, with vegetable byproducts. We can heat our greenhouses with our own wood chips. We can, you know, there's things we can do. We can make all of our own local compost, because in 2020, our seeds were more than a month delayed that we'd ordered, but we couldn't get inputs, like they just weren't arriving by truck in the pandemic. So we started making our own, and that's what food sovereignty is about. So anything that is sort of taking First Nations towards increasing dependency isn't food sovereignty. So if you're needing to rely on faraway companies and warehouses in order for your food production to run, that's not food sovereignty. What food sovereignty is about, among many things, is rebuilding that resilient Indigenous economy, so that when the trucks stop arriving, when the fuel stations run dry, which they are right now in BC, this is our reality.
In other parts of Canada too, yeah.
building supplies. I mean, it's getting hard to find basic building supplies up here in the north right now with this crisis that we're in. So that's what food sovereignty is about. That's why we started building greenhouses ourselves, is because we got all these pots, and A, they're super expensive to get any greenhouse up here, and B, they were all delayed, massively delayed due to the manufacturers having their own shortages in metal material and plastic and things like that. So I know I say I'm going to say something short, and then I say something really long.
It's so cool what you and Stephanie doing, and then Dale too with STEM and the stuff here. Hey, a question that came up from Kimmy Hull was about growing. Are any of you guys growing? And Stephanie did answer this, but maybe Stephanie would like to answer it to the audience too. And this is when we start off with Stephanie, and then we'll go back to Jacob on here, and Dale, if you have any knowledge of this as well, please add. So we'll go Stephanie first, Jacob, and then Dale. But are any of you growing any culturally significant edible plants and or native plants in the greenhouses, or let's say even cultivating them in another manner would be? I'd like to add to that. So Stephanie, why don't we go with you, then Jacob, and then Dale, if you know of anything as well. So Stephanie.
Well, for me, I've expressed interest in it. It's funny that people bring it up because in grade 8 I did an experiment using traditional medicines against modern medicines, and I got a gold medal for it. But long story short, yeah, I have expressed it, and kind of just looking at like, okay, what kind of is like traditional diet in the north for like what do people traditionally eat? So you have to kind of analyze what people are eating. Looking like it's potatoes and carrots, basically, because they keep longer up here, right? Yeah. So looking at things like that, and like, okay, so what else is there? But I know like for us, we have gardens and within our community that run throughout the summer. They produce potatoes for different sections of the community. I think it's 1, 2 3. I think there's 4 gardens. 3 or 4 gardens within our community that are, where they grow vegetables, and community works together. I actually live across from the main garden, so it's nice. I get to just walk across the street, go through the gate, and the garden is there. They have a kitchen and stuff set up. So, but yeah, at the Smart Farm, we're just basically concentrating on leafy greens right now. COVID kind of hit us too, having issues with suppliers. I think everybody is like, I think everybody across the board, doesn't matter where you are, is having issues with, like he said, Jacob said seeds, us, it's been certain supplies trying to get them here. Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, so I love that you said that, potatoes and carrots is what keeps well, but you want to explore and find ways of adding more of our traditional foods into it, like harvesting, cultivating them, and also on storage, which is a perfect segue that next week's conversation is with Dawn Tabanongan and EJ Fontaine, and they're going to be, and we've got people from Nunavut, and I will bring you your names for later. We've got a couple of the people in our chat here, but we're talking about more of the traditional side of foods, and Dawn's right into seed preservation, and so I imagine EJ will talk more about that too. But how do we restore them? And I think how do we restore, like our people survived off these lands for a millennial, since the beginning of time. They knew about it. So how do we bring that back? So Jacob, anything you guys are doing at your farm on that, and Dale, then insight into you on our traditional foods, and can we greenhouse them? Can we cultivate them? Jacob.
Yeah. So we just by accident, we didn't know this when we bought this farm, but it's a food forest here. And it gets on food forest. It's a crossroads between 4 different traditional Indigenous highways, and it turns out at all these crossroads, people here used to plant and cultivate food forests, so you could just kind of meet and eat, right there. So that's phenomenal, because you walk in our forest and it's all food or medicine. It's amazing. A lot of it doesn't want to grow in a greenhouse. It actually is designed to grow where it's growing. So we actually support and cultivate where it grows naturally, which is how people here used to do it. So there used to be spring burning and bush beating and things like that to support the indigenous food production and medicine production. However, a lot of the crops that we do grow, we're starting people at level 0, myself included, like that's where I started. Not even aware how many of our foods that we eat on a daily basis are that we can thank Indigenous people for, again, for that 8,000 plus years of intentional cultivation. Things, you know, things like tomatoes and potatoes and squash and corn and 89% of the world's edible beans were cultivated by Indigenous people, things like that. So we start with just basic education like that because we've had so much stripped and stolen from us, including pride in that history. So when we go to school here in BC, we're not taught that any of those crops are Indigenous. We are raised to believe that they're European and that we can thank, you know, the great white God or whatever for bringing us this food, and it's complete BS. So that's where we start, and our trainees, we have to kind of go through this phase of feeling angry first, angry for that knowledge that has been stripped away, and take pride in, yeah, it's these seeds that we're growing, like squashes, for example, that may not have been Indigenous to where we are here, but it's part of our collective Indigenous history and pride and culture. So that's some of the angle we take on it. We would love to do more Indigenous crops, and we are. We grow some local varieties of potatoes that have been here for at least 100 years, if not 200 years, that came here from the Iroquois people. They brought them over. That's the oral history, and they're gorgeous, amazing potatoes. Yeah, and apparently they came originally from Peru, right? They look more closely related to potatoes today in Peru than any potatoes you find in the store. So there's things like that we do here, but we start with level, like I said, level 0, which is just understanding, you know, our sort of true history as Indigenous people collectively and locally, and then we work our way up from there. And the greenhouse is a little further along. Everyone gets introduced to it, but we start with very basic greenhouse operations before getting into some of the more advanced stuff. And I see in the chat the Split Rock Nursery. They do some amazing things. If anyone wants to check them out. Almost entirely Indigenous plants and reclamation projects. And I was down there in the Lillooet area working with Statland when they got that up and running. Super inspirational how they actually went out and gathered all the Indigenous seeds from the forest and started greenhouse cultivating them. So there are a lot of projects like that are Indigenous owned and operated and run that do Indigenous plants that could probably speak better to it than me.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Jacob. I'm going to ask Dale here, but we also have a question. Is there a role for academia and research in helping to identify these traditional plants and how to cultivate or harvest them?
100%. And I got a really short, this is truly a short story. We had academics from a university in BC come to our farm, and I showed them our food forest, and they said, this is not a food forest. They said Indigenous people in this part of the world were not agrarian. They told me, and these were non-Indigenous people telling me their view. And I said, but look how intentional it seems like. And then it was a year later, last year, that a post-secondary research project concluded, and they released a paper saying that there are food forests up here, and they were placed at these crossroads. And guess what? We're a crossroad. This is a food forest. So I think in some cases we need academia to catch up with Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous oral history, instead of coming to Indigenous people and saying, no, you're wrong. They need to come in with open eyes and ears and look at the facts that are there. In this case, that these trees were all evenly spaced and seemed to be on a grid. You know, I was like, they're like, that's how they grow naturally. I'm like, are you? No, like, look at the rest of the forest. So we had a little friendly debate, and they just left saying no. But some researchers did come in and confirm elsewhere in BC, up here in the north, that food forests were a part of the history and culture here for sure. And now we have that to point to. Now we can say, okay, there's this academic paper, go look at it before you tell us no, right? So there's a huge role in helping to catch Western sort of studies and science up with actual Indigenous history and culture in agriculture.
That's great. And you reminded me that there's also some archaeological evidence what is on Vancouver Island with the way the First Nations people panned fish because they found those posts in it. So you just remind me, it's like we've been working these land. I think there is archaeological evidence. So thank you, Jacob. So people need to catch up on the academia side with our traditional knowledge and weave that in. We've got Shane commenting here. He said, I'd love to learn more about Indigenous traditional foods and how they are widely used today and on that. So that's great. Dale, what's your awareness of, because you've been all across Canada and working with First Nations, can we cultivate these Indigenous foods? How can we do that?
Oh, yes, we can cultivate these foods. And I wanted to comment on what Jacob was saying. A lot of times academia comes out to the Indigenous communities and they ask for the information, or in some cases they say, no, that didn't happen. But it's up to us to teach them or show them. And then once they write a report on it, then it's sanctioned, I guess, right, by an academic. And then, then people say, yeah, that's true. This type of agriculture happened here. Another thing I wanted to mention.
Working hand in hand to document and you're saying, look, learn from us. And by you documenting it, our knowledge then will be solidified in another field.
Yeah.
So, Dale, you're going to add?
Okay, I was going to add that the other one is I've worked with people from God's Lake in northern Manitoba, and I first met them at a food conference in Saskatoon, and they brought 2 big boxes of sunchokes, and also called Jerusalem artichokes. And sunchokes are indigenous to North America. And around God's Lake, they said they grew all over the place. And they looked like a 6-foot tall sunflower in a way. But the root that you eat looks like a ginger tuber.
Yeah.
And the good thing about them is that apparently they're good, and there's scientific articles on this, academic articles, that they are good for people that have diabetes to eat, because the glucose or whatever it is formed differently or gets digested differently, anyways. But apparently it's safe for diabetics to eat, and so that's something that people can grow, and it can grow in northern BC. It's a plant that grows in the north.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's delicious too.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad showed me recently what it was, and now I know what it is, and along with other traditional foods as well. Learning the way.
Yeah. And then there's also beans, squash, and corn, right? I think of the 3 sisters.
Yeah.
Right? And also grow beans here in Saskatchewan in the south. And there's evidence of that. And so, that came from the Dakota people. And so you think Dakota people were just chase buffalo all the time? No, but they're also from Minnesota, right? And they were agrarian as they moved.
Yeah.
So, so there was all these trade routes of people, right? And so there's a lot of indigenous foods that can be grown across Canada. And, just because it may have been grown in the East, or maybe it was grown in BC, it doesn't matter if it was indigenous to Canada. Let's learn about it and see if it grows in our area.
That links into like Jacob's comment on the food forest and with the crossroads itself. So was that a meeting of different nations, and they shared and they shared. Hey, we've got a question here on traditional plant seeds. Who and how the traditional plant seeds were kept. And I think we can also ask that to Dawn next week in our session, but anyone would like to tackle that question?
There's a guy that I know from Ganawagi. His name is Stephen McCoomber, And he grows traditional, he's got all these traditional plants and seeds, right? He grows corn squash, beans. And I got some seeds from him last year. I got the purple bean seeds from him, and they're excellent. And there's so many different kinds of corn that he grows. So that's and he's and yeah. So there's people that have these traditional seeds that they keep, and he trades a lot with the people down in the New Mexico area, right, with the Navajo down there.
Sounds like,
Yeah.
trading,
Yeah.
one of the things I mentioned earlier in these conversations, we'd like people to, give them the opportunity to build their network. And you just mentioning Stephen, like I said, we've got Dawn next week and EJ, as well as Stephanie, not Stephanie, Marie Massey and Jordan from Nunavut and from the food systems there. But sharing this knowledge as part of trading, as well as sharing some of the food there. But back to Stephanie. Stephanie, you mentioned your father taught you these things. How what way can we get more youth out in the land and engaged in agriculture? Yeah, your dad did, obviously. You're a good example of that. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I'm learning right now. I'm
Yeah.
actually learning about how to find areas where
Yes.
blueberries grow. Learned about that in the past couple of years, and learning about how to identify where certain traditional foods grow, and just I guess passing down that knowledge to me, because I'm up and coming now. I want to learn more about food sustainability, how to identify where the fish are, how to identify, where the sturgeon are hiding in the river, type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, just basically tagging along with him on adventures, and bringing my son with me now, because
Mhm.
and I don't know how other ways of doing it, but here in our community they hold culture camps. They take children out into the bush and go and teach them traditional methods of how to harvest and different ways to utilize the land. That's how I see we're doing it here. But yeah, for me, just wanting to follow my dad, because my dad's not gonna be around forever. He's got a lot of knowledge. He's got a lot of traditional knowledge. He knows how to harvest wild rice and things like that, like things that I wouldn't know how to do. Just learning how to do that as well is something, just for us to do together as a family.
Learning from the knowledge keepers and then passing that knowledge on, which brings me back to Jacob. You've been doing that. You said you had 70 people in training this one year, this one year, and I know
No,
a
it's
number of
actually a
them
lot.
were you. A lot more than that.
Yeah, it was actually 150 total, but
Holy.
150 total. Yeah, 70 were agricultural trainees.
Yeah.
Signed up for agricultural training, and the other half were signed up for employment and were youth, ages 15 to 30. So I've got a few things to say about this and to share. So one thing that's really important is if we keep doing things the way it's been done in recent history, we're going to continue to suffer from shocks into our food systems. And the food systems will continue to exclude Indigenous people. So I've seen some big changes happening recently. Here I mentioned the land dispossession is done through public policy. So I've been putting as much pressure as I can on government ministries and agencies to say, hey, you need to be a part of the solution, because you're a public agency that has a history of dispossession and destroying this agricultural culture here. You can be a part of the solution and reconciliation and bring it back. Now, with the youth, we had, like I said, we had about actually 80 youth sign up hoping for employment. We worked with the majority of them, and they signed up in the winter, and these are Indigenous youth aged 15 to 30. What I want to share is that only 5% of those that signed up hoping for employment, Indigenous youth, only 5% were able to be active. So what I mean is they had access to a vehicle and transportation and could get to a job interview or could go to school or whatever, only 5%. And the challenge we ran into is that funding is targeted to that 5%, not to the 95%. So funding is targeted to employed people. So if you've been employed before, you can get funded to retrain people. If you've been to post-secondary education, you can get funding to hire people, like we saw earlier in this presentation. But that only is 5% of our population here. The other 95% don't have transportation. We had huge barriers. 25% didn't have a bank account, and I could go through a long list. But the point is that 95% of our Indigenous youth population here, 15 to 30, is unable to be active, and we need to activate to support them. Otherwise, they cannot be active. They can't. So we had to do that. And I want to put a shout out to Trevor and the First Nations Agriculture Association, who pitched in big time in the winter and provided funding for transportation so we could arrange rides for youth to actually get them here so they could participate. So I just want to flag that with the youth. Like, we had a big success, but it was very difficult. The funders were a massive pain in the butt. I'll stop. I won't use swear words, but they either want to fund, they actually said to us for this Indigenous youth employment money that we could hire them, but we couldn't train them. We could hire them, but we couldn't support them. So we had to go and get people like Trevor, who stepped in at the last minute and helped us big time in order to make that actually happen. So it's very tenuous, very fragile, and we're really hoping that funders are going to get realistic about the reality of at least in our region, and I suspect we're not the only Indigenous region in Canada that suffers from these demographics. Our average median income here is under $20,000 a year for Indigenous people. Like, it's ridiculously low, and we can fix that as we've proven. But the funding environment has been incredibly difficult and frustrating, and not lined up with Indigenous reality at all. So I've been going back to funders saying, hey, here's our data. Here's the reality, and we'd really love it if you had changed some of your funding guidelines to line up with reality so we can start making a difference and we can start changing things on the ground, which we did this year. But I'm just saying it was a challenge. It's not easy to do what we did. So yeah, we ended up working with about 70 youth of the 80 or so that signed up. We paid around 7,000 hours to Indigenous youth, and they got trained. They worked through the winter, so it was mostly trades. So they learned carpentry and machine operation, cooking. We provided 6,000 warm meals here at Tea Creek this year, over 6,000. So we only had budgeted for lunches, but then when youth would show up, we'd just take a poll: how many people have you eaten this morning? And almost none of them had had a meal. So we just started doing breakfast and making it as affordable as we could, because we were on a tight budget. So we got local farm eggs. And so it was like farm eggs every morning with whatever bread we could get our hands on, but everybody got an option of a warm meal here at the farm. So 6,000 meals served. So that's a little bit of it. Like, I do want to thank, again, like, we had some support. ITA BC has been really supportive of what we're doing here.
Jacob, could you tell them who ITA is?
Yeah, Industry Trade Authority of BC. So we had some leadership from the Industry Trade Authority come to Tea Creek, and what they saw is that we were actually having this incredibly opposite reaction that they're used to seeing, which is with an Indigenous environment, culturally safe, land-based, Indigenous-led, that we had increased participation in our programming here from Indigenous people instead of decreased participation. Because so many Indigenous people would say, hey, go to college, go to university, and they end up in these sort of foreign, non-culturally safe environments that they see decreased enrollment. So they're used to funding the normal kind of environments that don't see a lot of Indigenous people participate and graduate. And here at Tea Creek, what they saw is that people were getting the same competencies. They're still learning to operate heavy machinery. They're still learning carpentry. They're still learning electrical and plumbing and all these trades, but their participation was actually going up, right?
Is that I think because you were not in a physical classroom where other ones is that being in the place where they could learn it? Did that have a role in the success?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so that they what they're focused on, and what WorkSafe BC is focused on as well, is what's called competencies, which is that you know how to do the job safely and properly. They're less focused on whether you can fill in a test on paper. So so they're really happy with our approach, because we're able to get people to competencies much quicker than in a classroom.
Yeah.
And they're
Wow.
able to demonstrate competencies, and a wide range of them. So I'm not a huge fan of that word competencies, but that's the one that is used. So we have zero classroom environment here. The closest we have is a shelter where we do our safety meetings in the morning, and we learn from mistakes, and we talk about the plan for the day. And we do have a screen up there where we do occasionally play a safety video or something like that, where we all watch it.
Great, thank you, Jacob. We are at the top of the hour, so I'm just going to ask our three speakers if you have one piece of advice to offer to our audience on whether, how to get into greenhousing or how to get youth more involved. So one piece of advice. Why don't we start with Dale, then we'll go to Stephanie, and last comment from Jacob before we move on to some of our funders. So Dale.
Okay, so I think one way to get youth involved is, in Saskatchewan, a majority of the schools on reserve have land-based learning classes, land-based learning curriculum. And I think that's spreading to a lot of the other provinces. And so I think in addition to the traditional activities that people did, that they're learning, that's a good place to get agriculture brought in, or other like blueberries or berries. And then in the prairies here, we pick choke cherries a lot, and we crush them and we use them for eating and for ceremonies, right? So if we can make that traditional connection in that way with the foods, I think that's one way to get them involved. And then have groups like Agriculture in a Classroom get involved with your schools.
Egg in the classroom should be egg in the land room.
Yeah.
So make it the land. That's Beverly's new word for you guys today. I just made that up, the land room instead of the classroom. Excellent. Great. Thanks, Dale. Stephanie, your one piece of advice.
Go looking for the kids. I do. I go searching, looking for kids that are interested in science and technology, and asking them questions, and inviting them into your facilities or whatever it may be. Just rolling with them, offering them food too. Kids love food. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, kids love food. You can eat.
I like that. Get them, go and look for them. And remember, when you've been specifically sought and invited to do something, it boosts your confidence because you're wanted. That's a great piece of advice. Jacob, the last word from you from our speakers, please.
Yeah, I would say know what your people want for food. Do that first, and lots of planning. So make sure you've got like a 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 25 year, 50, 100-year plan. And because this takes time, it's not a magic wand solution. You need to be committed to the long road to recovery in agriculture, in all the different forms that's going to take. That's my one piece of advice. And I want to also thank everybody for being here and for listening. And I would really want to also thank all of our supporters, those who supported us here at T3. So that includes you, Beverly. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. It's just I'm just so wowed, inspired by everything that's going on. Dale, you've been a long supporter and have hoed. There's my third pun for this session. Hoed a deep and long road for Indigenous agriculture across Canada. Stephanie, the things you guys are doing there in aquaponics, where you had food when other mainstream food sources were contaminated, specifically the romaine lettuce. Engaging youth, and Jacob, 150 people, and giving them that practical learning environment and making sure their needs were met. It's just such a great wise ways, best practices on things. So thank you three. And mention to the audience here that, again, Erin, our technology person here from CAHRC, is going to be sending out all of the contact information for you. So really, really glad you were able to do here today. So one of the things I mentioned that we would like you guys to be able to take away from these sessions is more knowledge on some of the funding programs that are available out there. That was mentioned a couple of times. There are funding, and we do have a number our audience is from different funding agencies. So we encourage you to hear the words of our speakers and get an Indigenous lens on these programs if that helps. And how can we make them better and more accessible? So this is where we go into. I'm going to ask Dominique Kelly from Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada, if he can share just to highlight some of the programs and initiatives at Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada. And for the audience, of course, stay with us because after we finish with our speakers, our funding programs here, we're going to be doing the draws for three $100 draws for our Indigenous participants. So on to Dominique.
Thanks, Beverly. First, I just want to say I've really enjoyed listening to the speakers this morning. I thought that was very good. Yeah, it was very, very informative. I'm Dominic Kelly and I work for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. I'm the manager of the Indigenous Pathfinder Service. So what our service provides people is a one-stop shop for advice to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's programs. So if you have a project or a project idea that you're looking for funding for, the Pathfinder service, you can contact us directly and we'll work with you one-on-one to learn about your project and to see where your project would fit into our funding envelope of programs. The other part of our service that we offer is we also work with other government departments. So while your project may or may not fit into some of our programs, we may be able to identify something that's out there, either within the province or another federal government department. We do have several programs that may be of interest to this group. I think the first one, the Indigenous Agriculture Food System Initiative, is very, very kind of into what we're talking about today. What this initiative is, works with communities that want to build food systems, food security type projects that have some form of economic development component associated to it. So we're not looking for in this program for the project to, make millions and millions of dollars, but it's more to be just self-sufficient. So the economic development component or the revenue generation from that project, if it can support the program as a whole, and then this project or this program is geared towards that. The second program that we have in regards to food systems and security, could you flip to the next slide, please, Beverly?
Absolutely. There you go.
We do have this agri-diversity program, and this program is more about building capacity, training and learning. Projects that we've supported in this program are more, we're supporting like regional conferences such as Indigenous Ag Days. I think it's at Agribition in Saskatoon. We supported the Northern Farm Training Institute through this. So this type of program will give Indigenous communities or Indigenous applicants that opportunity to get funding to develop a program or other type of assistance that helps build leadership within the agriculture field within Indigenous communities. And the final program I'd like to talk about is the Local Infrastructure Fund. And this program is about supporting communities that are looking to increase their food security and food sovereignty. So if you have like a farm, I'm thinking of, was it Tea Creek Farm? Like if you have like a spot where you can process food, where you can actually do some type of like secondary processing, the Local Food Infrastructure Fund can fund certain components of that type of project. So it doesn't have to be like a long-term outlook. It could be something really focused, like a set of freezers, a new roof on a community building. That's what that fund will focus. And of course, I only had a few minutes here, and each of these programs are very complex with lots of little nuances and details. If you need any more information from this, I'll put my email address inside of the chat, and you can contact us at any time, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you about these programs.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Dominique. Hey, a quick question here, though. Matthew Davidson asked, is there funding for community engagement gatherings around like farm barbecues?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's just like a barbecue where people are coming over, like a social gathering. It wouldn't include that type of funding unless it was part of a project. I don't think agridiversity could do that because there'd be minimums that the projects could fund. But if you did have like a bigger project that involved like some type of gathering, yes, that would be eligible.
Yeah, I would suggest it's probably if you were doing a community engagement on agricultural activities, like what traditional foods can we harvest, maybe sharing, and there happened to be a barbecue with it, then the answer would be there's funding somewhere, will help you find it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking about, I'd love to hear, Halsey Zai had Agriculture Canada is working with 6 national organizations to deliver emergency food programs through Salvation Army, Breakfast Club Canada, community food centers, and the list goes on here. And you can reach out to any of them if there is a food need in your community due to the pandemic. So I guess the Table de Chefs, Community Food Centers Canada, Second Harvest, and Food Bank Canada. So Aaron will add those into a link for some of you who've been probably rapidly writing these addresses down. Don't worry about it. Aaron will get you a link out with all of them, and this information that Dominic just went over, we have it in a PDF file for you to send out to you guys. So we'll make sure we get that out, so not to worry about that. A couple other things is in these programs, don't forget that your different ministries have funding. So your provincial governments, your territorial governments. Next week, we're going to be hearing from, I'm just going to go here. Next week, we're going to be hearing from Makivik Corporation. They're going to be our co-hosts with Marian Mace for Makivik Corporation, and also her colleague in another division with the Nunavut Regional Board of Health and Social Services. They got some really cool support food security projects going across Nunavut. And so they're also going to be talking about the Sirivik Food Center and the Hirusavik project. We've got, as I mentioned, Dawn Tabadongang from First Nations Growers. She'll talk about cultural foods and seed preservation. And EJ Fontaine, he's been in agriculture for all of his life. And he's what I call someone in our winter years with Amik, and they, not only is he a cattle farmer, but he's also really really a leader in communications, Indigenous communities, getting news out there, and he's got some stuff in labor as well as how to restore Indigenous cultures and foods. But I mentioned we've got First Nation. Excuse me. We've got a number of some other resources here. Don't forget to check in with your Indigenous Skills Employment Training agencies. So they're funded through Service Canada, and they're ones that they can do wage subsidies as well as the ones that, even with what CAHRC had mentioned. CAHRC specifically focuses on Indigenous people or any person in a post-secondary program. ISETs can do things with helping people to get back into the workforce or first enter the workforce. We've got our regional Indigenous organizations as well as, don't forget, and Jacob was really great at, and Stephanie about, and Trev and Dale talking about other things. It's not just agriculture, but forestry. So, check into other ministries and other different types of programs in other sectors like forestry, tourism, health, culture, and heritage. Don't just look at agriculture initiatives, because there may be some nuggets in some of these other ones, including like food initiatives. Some business funding is available through the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations. For example, last week we heard from Unawig. They're an Aboriginal financial institution as well, and they'll be listed in there. Dominic talked about some of the federal programs, and if they don't know, if they don't have exactly at their end, they'll help you connect with it. Jacob also said that. He also mentioned Industry Training Authority here in British Columbia. Who would have thought about that connecting with agriculture? And then don't forget your industry sectors as well, as Dale mentioned, Ag in Canada, Ag in the classroom, and 4-H is often also mentioned in it. But, apiary is a big thing as well. Farm Credit Canada. Unfortunately, Jesse wasn't able to be with us today, but they're also a source for.
Sorry, I am
Oh, you
here.
are?
I am,
excellent.
yes. I apologize.
Great.
I had competing meetings and had to join this one late, so I apologize for missing the conversation. I'll be as quick as I can here.
You've got the last slide before the draw, so go ahead.
Sure. So what you see there is just a quick view of the FCC knowledge section categories. If you go to fcc.ca/knowledge, FCC is Farm Credit Canada. We are a financial institution for agriculture and food industry. The reason I put up the money finance, those different tabs, is because if you click on those tabs, each one of those sections has really sort of a basics, what we call a business essentials plan. So you can click on money and finance and you'll get 10 steps to a solid business plan, and it guides you through that. So a little highlight there is, for example, the most important part of the business plan that we're communicating is that it needs to be able to show repayment capacity. And the smallest loan that FCC will do is $5,000. So anything $5,000 and up, FCC can finance with people. There are complications sometimes when it comes to on-reserve lending, but FCC, we've been committed to ensuring that that's not going to stop us from financing a project. So we have worked with on-reserve businesses to finance different ag and food projects. And then as well, that last section there, the Aboriginal financial institutions. I'll paste a quick link into the slide there. You can see I've highlighted some, but if you go to NACA.ca, there's a Aboriginal financial institutions section where you can see based on area and category of financial institution, and some of them are better suited for agriculture than others, but that's a great place to start as well. And I noticed some quick talk about different sort of projects and funding and things like that. So I want to actually, give me one moment. I'm going to post another thing into the chat, which is just the FCC Agri-Spirit Fund. And that's just a project where we finance different projects, different community builds or projects that need funding and don't really have any other place to get them. Things that we've done, we've built, helped fund fire departments or helped renovate skating rinks or other things like that. So it doesn't necessarily relate directly to agriculture projects, but within the rural community, projects that help strengthen the community. Applications aren't open for that yet, but I'm going to paste the link in there, and you guys can keep an eye on that. So when it is ready, you can have your ducks in a row for that. And I think that's all I need to say. That's the FCC Agri-Spirit Fund, that last link I just posted.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Some of you guys are asking for the links. Aaron's going to be sending out an email. Aaron's our techie person, and he's going to send out an email tomorrow with all of these links in it. So don't worry if you can't click into it, you'll get an email with all the links. So great, thank you very much, Jesse. And as he mentioned, there's a program that's emerging from their organization. You'll get more information on. So thank you guys for joining us. Of course, next week we have our last of our 5 sessions. And our last session is on more of the traditional and cultural aspects of it. So we've got, like I said, Maccabee Court. So again, same time, same day of the week, 11 a.m. Central itself. Email will be going out with the links as well as with a survey asking for your feedback. Thank you guys for joining us today. You guys stay safe, stay healthy, and be kind. And thank you to our speakers, Jacob, Stephanie, and Dale again. And thank you to CAHRC for hosting the session. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks.